Hello, everybody. This is Virtual Boy, a virtual presentation. I am Gabriel Kleinert. I am a video game enthusiast. I am a fantasy novelist, creator of multiple podcasts, owner of an RC Cola vending machine, and lover of all things red. That's really all you need to know about me. Let's get into the presentation. This is the Nintendo Virtual Boy. As you see, I have one here below the screen. What is the Virtual Boy? I hear you asking, what's that? What is the Virtual Boy? Well, the Virtual Boy is a 32-bit tabletop gaming console released by Nintendo. It was the first console capable of displaying stereoscopic 3D graphics. It was the first and to date only legitimately failed Nintendo console. There have been other Nintendo consoles that didn't perform as well as they would have liked, but this is the only one that is really considered a failure. Now, it began as a 3D head tracking 3D eyepiece device called a Private Eye, developed by Reflection Technology Incorporated. So it was originally, when it was being developed, something you strap to your head, like what you would expect from a modern virtual reality headset. Nintendo game designer Gunpei Yokoi loved the idea, expecting it to encourage creativity among developers and discourage piracy. Because the thing is, if the 3D element is so important to the experience, you're not really going to be able to pirate that as easily as you could with, say, a Nintendo Entertainment System or a Super Nintendo or Sega Genesis, because you would have to have hardware that was so close to what the actual thing is, and that's all proprietary and so on and so on. It would be much more difficult. And the creativity that it could encourage, getting people to develop 3D applications and so on and so on. It was in development for 4 years under the name VR32. And actually, one thing while I was doing research for this the other day, I realized that I think I had actually played something that the Private Eye was originally developed for. I was at where was it? I was at some amusement park somewhere back in the early 90s, and they had a 3D thing you could like get into. You put a thing on your head. It was head tracking. It was terrible, of course, by modern standards, but in my research, I realized I think that's what it was. Anyway. The display was created using only red LEDs. Due to various health and safety risks, head tracking capability was removed during development. Now, the thing about the red LEDs, technically when they were building the Virtual Boy, they had the capability, they were able to set it up to do all colors. But the problem was the blue and the green LEDs, specifically the blue ones, were way too expensive at the time, and they used too much power, and so it was just way cheaper to just use red ones. So that's what they went with. They went full hog into the red LEDs, and then the safety and health risks, probably because they didn't want people to be bumping into things while they're moving their head around and everything. So instead, they kind of scaled it down so that it was just the thing that you just kind of put your head into. Due to the simultaneous development of the Nintendo 64, very little attention and resources were given to the Virtual Boy team. So, kind of a combination of things are piling up here that aren't necessarily making it look very good for the Virtual Boy. Virtual Boy development leader Gunpei Yokoi was very unhappy with the finished product, as was everybody, in fact. It was released in July and August of 1995. I think July in America, or July in Japan. August in Japan in 1995 at the retail price of $179.95, which nowadays would be about double that, so about $360. The system had 4 launch titles, 4 whole launch titles: Mario Tennis, Red Alarm, Tellero Boxer, and Galactic Pinball. I actually have a copy of Mario Tennis and Red Alarm. I think Red Alarm is probably the one that is the closest to like showing off really what the Virtual Boy can do, but it's still pretty bad. We'll get to that later. Nintendo projected sales of 1.5 million consoles and 2.5 million games by the end of the year. So if you look at that, it released in the middle of the year. So by the end of half of 1 year, they were expecting 1.5 million and 2.5 million games. By December, they had only shipped 350,000 units. So didn't quite go so well. Now, production was ended by early 1996. You may recall it started in 1995, so was not in production for very long. The system only had 22 official release titles. There were there's information about as many as 27 that were unreleased. The system was discontinued without fanfare, and why did it fail? We'll get to that later. Now, the 22 figure that I gave, not all 22 were released in America. I think there were, I think it was like 19 were released in Japan and like 14 were released in America, or something like some sort of weird combination there. Now, how did the Virtual Boy work? I hear you asking over there in the audience. So they had two oscillating mirrors projected slightly different images into each eye. So there would be an LED on one side, LED on the other side, a lens that it was projecting through onto these mirrors that were spinning, and then those would go into your eyes, and each eye was getting a slightly different image. These two images gave the viewer the illusion of 3 dimensions, similar to wearing 3D glasses. For a long time, I actually thought that it was physically projecting a 3D image, like it was like there was one screen and then another screen. But in research for this, I found out that that's actually not the case. It's pretty much how VR works nowadays. You've got two images, something in between them that blocks your vision of both, and then each eye is just getting a different image there. So the controller acted as a power source, and it required 6 AA batteries or a specialized AC adapter. So the actual main console doesn't have a power source. It's all in the controller. The controller has a little thing that hooks on the back with the batteries in it. At one point, I did have the AC adapter, which was awesome, because, man, 6 AA batteries, no one wants to be spending 6 AA batteries on this thing at all. But anyway, it's been lost to time. So then the game cartridge was inserted into the console itself. As you can see, Space Pinball in this pixelated picture right there would plug into there, and then you would turn it on and off using the controller. The controller has a little switch on it. The console also did have link cable capability. However, no games ever came out that were multiplayer, so there was no use for it because it never really lived up to its expectations. Due to having a Z-axis for many of the games, the controller necessitated a second directional pad. So it's actually kind of like how the modern twin stick setup for most controllers is. You would have a control pad on both sides, and then you could, if you were Red Alarm, for example, is a great example of this because it's a 3D game where you're in a ship, and you've got one that controls upward movement, downward movement, left, right, and then another one that turns in those same directions. So again, very similar to how twin sticks work in like first-person shooters nowadays. The controller was notably symmetrical, allowing left-handed players to reverse the controls in some games. As you can see, there are 2 buttons on the right, 2 buttons on the left. Obviously, the ones on the right are labeled A and B, and the ones on the left are start and select, but some games you could switch it up so that you could have A and B on the left, and then start and select on the right. So it was kind of cool in that you could change up how you had it set up. So, the big question, why did the Virtual Boy fail? I know you've been watching this and you've been thinking, oh, it's got all these cool features. All these cool features that were clearly scaled back because they, were afraid of costs and damage and so on. How could this thing possibly have failed? So, one broad reason is expectation versus reality. Something doesn't quite live up to what you expected. The actual reasons, though, high price is number one. Like I said, it was $180, or in today's money, $360. $360 for something that really has quite a limited scope. Like, you're not really doing very much on this. There weren't really many games you could play, and the games you could play were pretty small and pretty short. It was also very uncomfortable. It would cause eye strain. Also, as you saw in the photo earlier, you kind of have to hunch over, especially if you're not a small child. So eye problems, back problems. Poorly constructed marketing is another one. The thing about it is that it's 3D, and you can't show off 3D in a commercial. Also, one thing, I don't have any slides for this, but there was actually a promotion where you could go to somewhere like Blockbuster Video, and you could actually rent a Virtual Boy. If you didn't want to spend the, in today's money, $360 to buy one, you could rent it and see what it was like for yourself, because, you can't see you can't see the graphics on TV, so people would pay a smaller amount of money to Blockbuster and take it home, and then they realized it was terrible. So people wouldn't buy a Virtual Boy because they rented it and realized it was not what they expected it to be. And really, the system at its core just wasn't very good. The colors are difficult to get used to. The discomfort of play. The games weren't very good. There weren't really any killer apps. There were like a few good games, but all of them were pretty short. All of them were pretty janky and just wasn't very good. So Nintendo laid the brunt of the blame for the Virtual Boy's failure on its designer Gunpei Yokoi, which is really a shame because this is the guy that created the Game Boy. The Game Boy, one of the highest selling devices ever, he spearheaded that as part of Nintendo's R&D 1 division, and they blamed him for this problem. Whether it was his fault or not, who knows, but I'm sure a lot of factors went into that, but they blamed him. This led to Yokoi's withdrawal from Nintendo, after which he formed his own company and developed the Wonder Swan color. He actually died just a couple of years later. I think he was in a car accident. The original creators, Reflective Technology Incorporated, were devastated by the failure and went bankrupt in 1997. So once again, the console comes out in 1995 after 4 years of development. They stopped producing in 1996, and the original company here went bankrupt 1 year later. So the failure of the Virtual Boy did little to hinder Nintendo's pursuit of innovation. As you know, the Nintendo 64 came out right after this, which had a lot of features that had the first major console with a analog stick. They came out with the Wii after that with the motion controls, the Switch, and so on and so on. So Nintendo has always been still in pursuit of innovation, even when some of their products have not been quite as good as they hoped. They eventually reused the 3D concept with the 3DS in 2010. Also, the Nintendo Labo for the Nintendo Switch could be said to be a legacy keeper of the Virtual Boy, because it is also a virtual, a 3D device that you can use with a Nintendo product. Also, the Nintendo Labo also does not have, it doesn't strap to your head. That one does have motion tracking with your head, but Nintendo just does not want you to strap anything to your head. They probably think you'll bump into too many things. Who knows? The Virtual Boy became a collector's item with a cult following. I do have one, as you see here. They're fairly valuable. They're not like $1 billion, but they're fairly valuable. We'll get to that in a moment. And within recent years, a homebrew community has developed. You can actually buy a little cartridge for the Virtual Boy. You can buy one on, various websites, and then you can upload homebrew games. You can download ROMs and upload those onto them, and you can play those on your Virtual Boy. They're really expensive, so I don't have one, but I like that sort of thing exists. Now, of course, I hear you asking, where can I get a Virtual Boy? Gabe, you made it sound so cool. Despite all of its flaws, I want a Virtual Boy so bad. Where are you going to get one? You have a few options. eBay. For between $150 and $500, they can be pretty pricey, Use eBay tactics, whatever you want to do. You could probably get one on eBay relatively easily in whatever, various types of conditions, between $150 and $500. Amazon also. There aren't a ton of listings on Amazon, and they tend to be more expensive on Amazon than on eBay, but just the other day I saw there were some between $400 and $800. Again, pricey, but hey, it's a piece of history. Time travel. If you were to go back to when I got mine, right after they started to fail and the stores were just trying to get them out of there, get yourself to a KB toy store. You can probably get one as low as $30, maybe $100. You're good. Last option, Magic Genie. Depending on how much you spend on the lamp, you find it on a beach or you get it at a garage sale or whatever, between $0 and $50. One of those wishes can get you a Virtual Boy, no problem. Final question. Can I try a Virtual Boy? Yes. I do have one right here. Maybe. Mine has an issue. There's actually a common issue in Virtual Boys, especially this long after the fact, where one of the screens will stop working. I've actually heard that one of the ways to fix it is you actually put the Virtual Boy in the oven for a short period of time. I have not done so. I thought this was fixed because it had stopped having this issue, but it came back. So maybe, if you'd like to try out a Virtual Boy, you are welcome. try it at your own risk. You might not get any 3D out of it because you might only have one screen. Anyway, that's all. So I have 4 games for it. Wario Land is one of the games that I have. It is, I think, widely regarded as the best game on the Virtual Boy. It's a 2D side-scroller where you play as Wario. You jump back and forth between the foreground and the background. It uses a 3D. Okay, whatever. It's a fun game. It's not really showing off what the Virtual Boy can do. Another game that I have is Red Alarm. I mentioned earlier, Red Alarm is really the game that shows off the 3D effect as well as it could. This is a 3D game where you're flying around a ship. You can change the view so you're inside the cockpit. It's pretty cool. However, it's really short. If you know what you're doing, you can get through it in an hour. And then it's there's no other options. There's just the one thing. There's no special unlockables. I've also got Mario Tennis, which is a tennis game. The ball feels like it's coming at you. It's not bad. And then Mario Clash is a game that is in the style of the way, way, way original Mario Brothers game where you're jumping on pipes and hitting a POW block and monsters are coming out of pipes, except it is 3D. You are similarly going back and forth between the front of the foreground and the background trying to kill all the enemies. So those are the 4 games that I have. If you would like to try one out, you are welcome. But yeah, that's been my Virtual Boy presentation. Thank you all for listening. And if you find a magic genie, let me know.
Woo!